Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes, the most beautiful stories do not begin in castles or candle-lit gardens. Sometimes, they begin in the quiet corners of forgotten towns, where the air smells of old books, where dreams cling to dust, and where love dares to bloom even when the world looks away. In the little town of Evershade, tucked between misty hills and ancient oaks, there stood an old bookstore, the Lantern's Light. It was not the kind of place people noticed anymore. The signboard hung by a single nail, the windows were cloudy with time, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of paper that had lived 1,000 lives. The store was owned by Eleanor Rosewood, a woman in her late 30s, quiet, graceful, and lost in her own melancholy rhythm. She was known as the woman who talked to roses, because she kept a single rose in a vase by the window, a rose that never seemed to wilt, no matter the season. People would often joke, "Eleanor's flower outlives love itself," never knowing how true those words really were. Eleanor had once been a painter, a dreamer who saw beauty in everything. But dreams, as fate often decides, were stolen from her one by one. Her fiancé, Daniel Whitmore, a passionate violinist, had vanished 10 years ago during a storm on his way to perform at a music festival. His ship never reached shore. The sea took him, or so everyone believed. But Eleanor never accepted it. She believed love was not so fragile. Every evening, as twilight brushed the sky, she would sit by the window, her hands clasped, whispering to the rose, the only thing Daniel had given her before he left. "Wait for me," he had said, pressing the crimson bloom into her palm. "If I don't return, this rose will know my whispers, and they will find you." And so she waited. Not for days or months, but for years, while the rest of the world forgot. The townspeople pitied her. They called her love a ghost, her hope a delusion. Yet, within her heart, she carried a certainty, that some loves are not written in time, but in eternity. 10 years had passed since that night of storm and sorrow, when the sea swallowed a man and left a woman to battle the silence. Eleanor's bookstore had become her refuge. Every shelf carried memories, of laughter shared between lovers who believed the world could be painted in color. But now, her brushes lay untouched, her canvases empty. Only the rose by the window remained vibrant, defiant against decay, a reminder of a promise whispered long ago. One evening, when the rain tapped softly on the glass, a young traveler entered the store. His name was Thomas, a writer with tired eyes and a curious heart. He came seeking warmth and stories. The bell above the door chimed softly, and Eleanor, startled, looked up from her book. He smiled. "I've been walking through this town for hours. Your shop looked like the only place still alive." She returned a faint smile. Alive, perhaps, in the company of ghosts. As days turned into weeks, Thomas began visiting more often. He would read old poetry aloud, and she would listen, lost between words and memories. He noticed the rose one evening and asked, "Why does it never die?" Eleanor's eyes softened. "Because it was never meant to live only here. It carries whispers from a world that doesn't forget." Thomas, moved by her devotion, began to write her story, of love lost and found, of whispers carried by roses. But one night, while searching through the shelves, he discovered something that would change everything. Behind a loose brick in the wall, he found a sealed envelope, yellowed by time. The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, curved, and trembling with emotion. The name written on it made Eleanor's breath catch, Eleanor Rosewood. With shaking hands, she opened it. Inside was a letter dated 10 years ago, the day Daniel's ship disappeared. "Greater than my dearest Eleanor. If this letter ever reaches you, it means fate has played a cruel trick upon us. The storm has grown fierce, and I fear the sea may claim my body, but never my soul. For I have loved you beyond the bounds of time. If I am taken, follow the rose. It holds my last breath, my last promise. I will find you in the echoes of its petals. Do not let the world tell you that I am gone, for love never dies, it only changes its form. Yours, in every life that follows. Daniel." Tears fell silently onto the parchment. Thomas watched her, realizing he was witnessing something divine, love that had transcended time itself. The next morning, something strange happened in Evershade. A soft melody drifted through the misty streets, faint but unmistakable. It was the song Daniel had once played for Eleanor, Whispers of the Forgotten Rose. The townsfolk stopped to listen, confused, enchanted. The sound came from the hills, from an abandoned chapel overlooking the sea. Eleanor's heart raced. Without hesitation, she followed the music, her footsteps echoing with the rhythm of memory. Thomas ran after her, afraid she might lose herself in grief. But when they reached the chapel, what they found defied reason. There, in the flickering light of the setting sun, stood an old man, frail, gray-haired, his clothes weathered by salt and wind. In his trembling hands, he held a violin. He stopped playing when he saw her. His eyes, though aged and weary, still carried the same spark of blue that had once held her heart captive. "Eleanor," he whispered. Time collapsed. The years between them dissolved like mist. She stumbled forward, her tears falling freely. "Daniel, how are you here?" He smiled faintly. "The sea did not claim me. It left me on an island, broken but breathing. I waited, for years. I sent letters, but none reached you. I thought you had moved on." Eleanor shook her head, her voice trembling. "I never stopped waiting. I lived every day believing your whispers would find me." They stood there, two souls aged by sorrow, reunited not by chance but by destiny. The rose she carried in her hand began to wilt for the first time, its purpose fulfilled. Thomas, witnessing this reunion, felt the air thicken with emotion. He realized love was not just a feeling, it was a force, eternal and defiant, that bends even fate itself. That night, the chapel glowed with candlelight. Daniel played his violin once more, and Eleanor painted after 10 long years. Together, they turned their pain into art, their silence into song. Winter returned to Evershade with a quiet tenderness. Snow blanketed the streets, and the bookstore windows shimmered with the golden light of remembrance. Daniel lay in a small bed near the window, the same window where the rose had once stood. Eleanor sat beside him, holding his hand, her eyes filled with both love and fear. He looked at her and whispered, "Promise me, Eleanor, when the last note fades, don't mourn me. Play the song, and I will be there, in the whisper of the wind, in the bloom of the rose." She nodded, tears glistening like morning dew. "You'll never be forgotten, my love." On the night he took his final breath, the wind carried the faint sound of a violin, soft, lingering, eternal. The rose by the window bloomed again, brighter than ever before. Years passed. Eleanor grew older, but her spirit never dimmed. People often saw her sitting by the sea, painting the horizon, talking softly to the waves. They said she was mad, speaking to a ghost. But those who looked closer knew, love was speaking back. Before her final days, Eleanor wrote a letter addressed to the world. "Greater than do not pity love that ends in tears. Pity love that never dared to begin. For true love is not measured in years or distance, it is measured in the courage to believe when reason says no. The rose by my window still blooms, and in every petal, I hear his voice, whispering that love, once true, never fades. It only changes its form." When she passed, the townspeople found her seated by the window, her face peaceful, her hand resting near the rose that had never wilted again. Thomas, now an older man, published their story, Whispers of the Forgotten Rose. It became a timeless legend, not of tragedy, but of devotion that conquered time itself. And even today, if you ever visit the ruins of Evershade, you might hear it, faint, delicate, the sound of a violin carried by the wind, and a whisper among the roses. Ladies and gentlemen, the story of Eleanor and Daniel is not just about loss, it's about faith. About believing that love can outlast even death, that time cannot erase a promise made by two hearts that dared to dream. We live in a world that often forgets the power of patience, of loyalty, of silent prayers whispered into the dark. But perhaps, if we pause long enough, we too might hear the whispers of our own forgotten roses, the echoes of love we once believed in. For in the end, it is not the flowers that fade, it is we who forget to water them with hope.